You must love podcasts if you're listening to this. Do you want to start your own one or you already have one? Then follow Smarter Podcasting to get expert advice from me, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. Since 2019, we've worked with over 40 podcasters, produced over 700 episodes, and helped many podcasts get to the top of the Apple Podcast charts. And right now, I'm offering you a professional edit for just $27. Click the link in the show notes. Not everyone. Not everyone. 99% of people don't make it. One of my biggest pet peeves in the industry is when I hear people saying start a podcast as a side hustle. All of these side hustles take dedication and commitment to being successful. So if you start a podcast for a side hustle, then you've made the wrong decision. Welcome to another episode of Smarter Podcasting with me, your host, Neil Mackay, the podcast guy. I fell in love with podcasts in the early 2000s, which puts me at a very old age. But I fell in love with the Ricky Gervais show in the early 2000s, then Serial 2014, and just have basically never stopped listening to podcasts since then. I absolutely love it. I live and breathe podcasts. I'm obsessed with the medium, to the point where in 2019, I started my own podcast, a Vietnam podcast, which is now in the top 5% of podcasts around the world. And I started 7 Million Bikes podcast, which we help people make the best podcast possible. Since then, we've worked with over 60 podcasts, worked on thousands of episodes, helped with millions of downloads, and helped podcasts get to the top of the charts. We would love to work with you as well. So if you need help creating your podcast, then don't forget, get in touch. Go to 7millionbikes.com. But in this show, Smarter Podcasting, I want to share my tips and my tricks, talk to experts in the field, share even my failures, everything I've learned along the way that can help you be successful. Now, in this episode today, I'm going to cover something that is not part of our core services at 7 Million Bikes Podcast. We focus on audio and video quality and helping you make the best podcast possible. We don't do much on promotion, and we definitely don't do much about monetization. But in this episode today, I want to share with you how not to monetize your podcast. Now, before we get started, one of my biggest pet peeves in the industry is when I hear or when I read blogs mostly about people saying start a podcast as a side hustle. Just like I hate it when people say start a blog as a side hustle, start an e-commerce website as a side hustle. All of these side hustles take dedication and commitment to being successful. So if you've read one of these blogs that says start a podcast for a side hustle, it's so easy, you'll start making all this money, and your number one goal for starting a podcast is not for the love of it, it's because you want to make money, then you've made the wrong decision and stop listening to this podcast now. If you've made a podcast because you love it, because you love podcasting and you love the whole process, but then along the way you're thinking, how could I make a little bit of money off of this? Then let me share with you right now what not to do and what to do as well. So one of the things we need to talk about is the CPM, which is a rate that comes from radio advertising, and it's the cost per 1,000 listens. Now, at the moment, even though the money in podcasting is doubling and tripling, and there's billions and billions of dollars going into advertising and podcasting every single year, it really is, and I'm not joking, it really is only the top 1% of podcasts that are making that sort of money. It's the Wonderies of the world. It's the Goal Hanger podcast by Gary Lineker. It's an iHeartRadio podcast. It's all of these ones that get hundreds of thousands, if not millions of downloads per episode. Now, I'm not saying you can't do it. You can. There are some podcasts that have. I think of Sounds Like a Cult, was started by two women in the front room during COVID. I think of my favorite podcast of all time, How My Dad Wrote a Porno, which was three university friends sitting around a kitchen table talking about why one of their dads wrote a porno. It's amazing. Go listen to it if you haven't already. These podcasts did blow up. They got millions and millions of downloads, and they attract sponsors and they make money. My Dad Wrote a Porno ended up doing worldwide tours, which I still think is incredible. They got to play the Sydney Opera House. But even them, even all of those podcasts, they are in the top 1%. Not everyone. Not everyone. 99% of people don't make it there. Now, if we look at the stats, if you get 30 downloads per week or 30 downloads in the first 7 days of release, you are in the top 50%. of podcasts worldwide. So if you're listening to that stat, don't give yourself a hard time if you're getting 50 downloads or 100 downloads. Even if you're getting only 15 people are listening to your content, it's amazing. But be aware of the stat. To be in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide, you need 1,100 downloads in the first 7 days of release. So just think about that. That's just the top 5%, not the top 1%. The top 1% of podcasts get a minimum of 4,000 downloads in the first 7 days. So how not to monetize your podcast? Sponsorship. It is something that unless you break into that top 1%, that top 5%, you are not going to make a lot of money from it. So as I mentioned, the cost per 1,000 listens is just, at the moment, $29 per 1,000. So even if you get 5,000 listens in the first week, it's only $150 per week. Now that works out $600 a month. That's nothing to be sniffed at, and that is amazing, but it is criminally low. So how do you monetize your podcast? Well, I want to share with you something that I've come across recently that has started to help me make a tiny bit of money for my show, A Vietnam Podcast. And then I want to share with you what we tell our clients to do and how one of our clients has turned their podcast into hundreds of thousands of dollars of work, if not millions. I don't know the exact figures, but knowing what they do, those kind of numbers are pretty accurate. So one of the things I want to share with you is about dynamic ads. Now, most ads that you will be familiar with will probably be baked in ads. These big, massive 1% shows who talk about their sponsors as part of the show, and they're going to live in the show forever. So even in 5 years' time, if you go back and listen to an old episode, that ad is still going to be there, even though it was paid for 5 years ago. Baked in ads are great. They normally pay a little bit more. And if you're in that top 1%, they can give you a lot of good money. What I want to talk about, though, is dynamic ads and what a difference it can make to, one, being consistent, and two, building up a back catalog. Now, what I do with a Vietnam podcast at the moment is I sell sponsorship based on dynamic ads. So we're in the top 5% of podcasts worldwide. That's based on the fact we do 2 episodes a week. We get a good amount of downloads, but it's mostly based on the amount of total listens that we get to the whole back catalog. Now, I now have over 300 episodes since I started in 2019. And a few years ago, I looked at my downloads and they were huge. They were big. But I was comparing it to my weekly downloads of each episode, and I was like, this is so much bigger. Then I realized what it is, because I created evergreen content, and I did this on purpose from the beginning, people were listening to the back catalog. So whereas an episode of mine might get 150 to 200, maybe on a good week, 300 listens in the first week, my back catalog is getting sometimes up to 500, 700, 1,000 listens per week. That suddenly makes that CPM a lot more attractive, even for a small podcast like mine. So in my last 30 days, I had 2,200 downloads. So cost per 1,000, that's $30. That means I can charge $60 for that amount of downloads. This is why dynamic ads are amazing, because I can add these spots in and take them out whenever, and I can apply them to my whole back catalog. So for the sponsor, they're still getting the same amount of downloads. They don't really care whether it's a new or an old episode that someone's consuming. Somebody is consuming that. Now, not only that, what I realized was you can sell multiple sponsorships per show. Ideally, I would love to have 3, 4, or 5. At the moment, I have 2, and they each sign up for 6,000 downloads. So it's not a huge amount of money, but it's money nonetheless for a small podcast, and it goes towards the creation of the podcast, for the Buzzsprout fees, for the Descript fees, for my editor fees, everything like that. So if your podcast is still relatively small, and by small I mean less than the top 1%, if you're not in that top 1% yet, which 99% of us aren't, think about selling sponsorship for your dynamic ads and how you can package that together, and reach out to local brands. Don't worry about the BetterHelps of the world. Don't worry about getting these big brands that you hear on the podcast that you might listen to. Talk to your local bar. That's who I'm sponsored by. Talk to your local community brands that want to be involved, that want to help you, that it's not a huge amount of money, but they want to be part of your podcast. If you have a niche about knitting, reach out to small knitwear companies, thread companies near you. If you have a podcast about accounting, reach out to accounting firms in your local area. You will be surprised how many businesses will be keen to get involved, and especially because it is just a small amount. So that's one way, if you have a small podcast, that you can be able to monetize even in a little bit. But I told you I wanted to share how you can monetize in a big way with an even smaller audience. Now, first of all, I want to share with you a story about a company that I had a meeting with lately. And eventually I emailed them back and said, I don't think we're the right choice to work with you. Now, the reason was, there was a few reasons. Number one, their main goal was to get 5,000 views per episode on YouTube. I said, why? They said, oh, we want a top of funnel marketing. We just want everyone and anyone to listen to it. They had a very specific niche. And I said to them, well, why would you want to attract everyone and anyone? These people aren't your customers. They won't ever use your services. No, but we want top of funnel marketing, and then, they'll come through. Like, okay, fine, that's fine. How often are you posting episodes? About every 3 months, 4 months, whenever they could, because it was difficult to get guests. And that's true. It is difficult sometimes to get guests. But if you want to have a target for 5,000 people without being consistent, it's going to be really difficult to get there. And then the last thing, there was a deal breaker, which happens many times. They won't tell you their budget. They say they don't know what their budget is. But like, if you don't know your budget, I don't know how to help you. So I eventually got back to them and said, look, sorry, I don't have a proposal for you. I don't think we can help you. You're probably better working with a YouTube accelerator if you want to get to 5,000 views. We think you need to be consistent. You need to post every week, every 2 weeks. And if you want to turn this into sales, you want to build your business, we think you should niche down and make your podcast as specific as possible to attract the right people. And that's what this comes down to. Even if you're getting 50 or 100 listeners, viewers, whatever you want to call it, per week, if they are the right people, if they are the decision makers in your niche, then you have found the correct audience. You don't need 1,000 per week or 1,000 in the first month. Whatever it is, you need to be attracting the right people. And hopefully you listening to this podcast right now are the right person. I would assume that you have a podcast or you want to start a podcast, and that's why you're listening to someone talking about podcasting, and maybe you want to work with me so we can help you with your podcast. I assume you're not listening to me rattle on about podcast monetization because you're an accountant. You might be an accountant with a podcast, but if you're just an accountant, this is not for you. And I assume there's none of you are listening to this. In fact, leave a comment. Let me know, what do you do? Are you interested in starting a podcast? I want to hear from you. But if you are interested, or you have one already, and you want to make money and you want to support your business, then the best way to do that is through podcast marketing, which is what a podcast is. It's just another form of marketing. It's not a silver bullet. It doesn't mean overnight, once you start a podcast, the sales are going to start come flying in. It's just up there with digital marketing, television advertising, radio advertising. It's part of the mix of whatever you do, but it is one of the most cost-effective ways to do that. So I recommend that if you haven't already, create a niche podcast that's related to your business, that you want to attract people who are decision makers, CEOs, directors of marketing, people within your industry that can then listen to your podcast and make a decision and use your services. And I want to share with you one of my favorite stories to share is our first ever podcast client. We're still working with them to this day. Sometimes I see the reports, they get 5 listens a week. They get minuscule amounts of listens, and they have successfully turned their podcast into, I don't know for sure, but I imagine a minimum of hundreds of thousands of dollars, probably, maybe, I'm not sure, millions of dollars worth of business. What they did was they contacted me and they said, hey, we want to connect with our customers. We want to give them value. And we think the best way to do that is through a podcast. We don't have many customers. We're not trying to build this big podcast. We just want to give them something of value so that then they remember us and then they want to work with us. So we did that, and we still do that to this day. And sure enough, that first set of podcast episodes we did, it was a series of 5 episodes. They sent it out to all their clients, big multinational, multi-billion-dollar companies. And almost immediately, one of them got back to them and said, hey, we haven't heard from you guys in ages. We love you guys. We love this. Let's have a meeting. And I know that meeting then turned into a contract and business. And as I said, I don't know the stats. I don't know the figures, but I know it was a lot. That for me is the best example of how a podcast can support your business. So if you want to make a podcast, please get in touch. Neil@7millionbikes.com. Go to 7millionbikes.com. Book a call with me for free. I would love to chat through with you how we can help you, one, create a really, really good quality podcast, one that makes a difference, and how we can help you change that into sales and change that into more customers, which is, if you have a business, what you want at the end of the day. So thank you very much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. Whether you're on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts, wherever it is, please leave a review, rate, subscribe. And the best thing that you can do for me, please share this with someone else who's interested in podcasting, who also wants to make a podcast, and hopefully we'll be able to help them as well. All right. Thank you very much. Have a good one. Cheers.
Hi, my name is Sal Jeffries. I run the Mindset, Mood and Movement podcasts. I've been working with Neil at 7 Million Bikes for the whole of this year, literally from the start of my podcast to date. And I want to say a couple of things. So when we record the podcast, sometimes there are things that I need tweaking. There could be edits or clips. It's really simple. I give those instructions to Neil, he gets it sorted. There's sometimes a sound level differences between the guest mic and mine. Again, that's all sorted so the outcome is a really balanced sound. And also if there are issues with voice, little kind of sound interruptions, all those things that can distract a listener, Neil knows exactly what to do, cleans it up. The end result, a highly professional, beautiful sounding podcast without distraction. That's exactly what I want. I know my listeners do. So if you're interested in having that level of podcast and that kind of quality, Neil is a great guy and I highly recommend you speak to him.